Well, the clock on the clubhouse wall says that it is 2 minutes after, so we want to honor your time and get after it today. We are excited about today's presentation. We're calling it Pride of Place. And for those of you I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Scott Fussell. I'm a Beta Theta Pi from Middle Tennessee State. I am also the Director of Education for CSL Management. And for the purposes of today's conversation, I serve as the host of our House and Home series. And I'll also be managing the chat feature, which we are going to move to the questions feature. The chat feature has given us a little bit of fits today. So if you have a question in the middle of our session, we've got everybody in mute only mode right now. So if you have a question, hop into the questions section on your control panel, jot your question there. I'll see it, and when I can jump in, I will. And if I'm unable to kind of squeeze in and ask Eric or Woody your question right then, I'll do my best to come back to those at the end of our session. So really quickly, what are we doing today? We're calling this presentation Pride of Place. Specifically, we're going to be diving into a conversation about preventative maintenance and how that really is an indicator or a really important way that we can show pride in our places that we call home. So we'll be talking about what the data tells us, going through some of the basics of preventative maintenance and talking a lot about design. Here's a roadmap of where we're going to be taking our conversation this morning. So we're going to be talking about the difference between men and women, not in general, the differences between men and women. We are not qualified to have that conversation. But we are going to talk about some of the differences between men and women in terms of design, in terms of some of the best practices we need to have in place from a preventative maintenance perspective. And specifically, we'll get into some considerations that you should keep in mind when we're thinking about design. And we'll talk about some points of emphasis both on the men's and the women's side. We are excited this morning to have Eric Rowland with us. He is with Luminaut Architects out of Indianapolis/Cincinnati. And Eric will be joining us shortly. He is wrapping up a call at the moment, and we'll be having him join as soon as he is able. And we're also very excited to have my right-hand man, Woody Ratterman, with us as always. So Woody is a chapter brother of mine from Middle Tennessee State. He's our managing partner here at CSL Management. And if there's anyone in the industry who knows any more about property management, specifically when it comes to fraternity sorority housing, I haven't met him yet. So excited to have Woody on the call with us today and to share his expertise and really dive into this topic on preventative maintenance. So Woody, we're going to rely on you to do a lot of the heavy lifting, and I will probably be jumping in with a question or two along the way. So let's get started right there, Woody. Get into some of the details about the differences between men and women as it relates to design, as it relates to this experience, as it relates to preventative maintenance. Take us down that path, would you?
Sure. Well, first, it's great to be with everybody once again, and appreciate you guys taking time out of your schedule to be with us and to hopefully share some of your questions and thoughts on these topics as well. But when we actually put this together, Eric and I were asked to present at a conference last month on this topic as it relates to preventative maintenance. And if you think about, if you've been in any of our other recent webinars, we have been talking a lot about the economy, talking a lot about what things are costing, especially on the project front, construction front, which is bringing to the forefront, if you will, a reminder of the importance of preventative maintenance and why it's important to maintain the systems we have and try to get as much of a lifespan that we can out of them. Whether you think about useful life of equipment, of facilities, things of that nature, and what differences there are on the men and women's side, mechanically wise, probably not a lot. It's going to be driven by the size of the house, the number of members coming in and out, all those different things. But we know mechanical systems, if we can get 10 to 15 years out of an HVAC system, great. If we can get up to 20 years out of a boiler, which 30 years ago you could get almost 50 plus years out of boilers. If we can get 20 nowadays, that's awesome. But when you start looking at preventive maintenance on fixtures or furniture, that's where you start seeing differentiations between the men and women side of the equation. Certainly on the men's side, those pieces tend to last a lot less in terms of time versus the women on furniture, any of the decorations, things of that in a nature in the house, simply because on the men's side, we're typically inviting more people to our facilities more frequently than the women, and our facilities are certainly used different. Now, as we continue to evolve as on the men's side in our organizations and how we use our facilities, or even how we're allowed to use our facilities, especially from a social perspective, we could certainly garner that in the future, those things will hopefully last longer. We always tell clients or recommend, at least on common area furniture, from a replacement cycle, preventive maintenance cycle, things of that nature. For that, it's you're lucky if you get 7, ideally 10 years on that. Bedroom furniture might be 15, 20 if it's not built in. You can cut those in half on the men's side of the equation versus women. So the other dynamic that came out of this and was very interesting to us as we were preparing for this presentation last month is we looked at our data within CSL, and we went back over 5,000 work tickets over the last 2 years. We just went back 2 years with the pandemic and everything. We're still adjusting those years of data and as it relates to the data before then, but at least the last 2 years we went back and looked at preventive maintenance, and just out of curiosity, where men and women spend differently and if there is any differences. Nothing was really out of the ordinary outside of one area that we'll speak about here in a second, but as it related to, if we go to the next slide, Scott, it's related to the HVAC piece and preventive maintenance and things of that nature on that element. We did see that women's facilities, I should say, spend more than on the men's by 3 times in some regards and what they're spending on those costs. What was interesting is on the plumbing side of the equation, you would think by and large that we've always had this theory that the women are spending more when it comes to preventive maintenance than the men on the plumbing side of the equation, because you think about drains, you think about just the volume that happens as relates to the uses of the restrooms and things of that nature. But what we actually see is that the men are spending a little bit more, and some of that, if we study the data a little bit more and how things are getting classified. But again, it goes back to, at least from our observations, is the fact that on the social side of things and how the facilities are used is where that's impacting the men. The kitchen equipment and things of that nature in the facility and the costs related to that, there were a lot of similarities in that. We would see, you could get very micro into on an ice machine, it would be anywhere from $300 to $500 a year to keeping that thing clean and maintenance and working from that standpoint. Stoves is going to be probably 2 times that, depending on how old the stove is and how well the team maintains it throughout the year when they're coming into the summer and trying to get a whole year's worth of work off of that stove. So, but we would see on from a cost globally on preventative maintenance. So think about on the plumbing side of the equation, you can expect between $1,200 to $1,500 a year, depending on how you do your preventive maintenance for plumbing. For us and working with our clients, we do it twice a year, normally during winter break and summer break, and you're coming in and having every fixture, every faucet, every toilet, anything plumbing related checked out, drains, all of that. So to have a plumber to come in and spend the time, depending on the size of your facility, they're going to charge anywhere from $200 to $500 for that time. And then inevitably they're going to find something, right? Drains need to be snaked. There's a faucet that's leaking, whatever it may be. Given our facilities, it's going to be rare that they don't find a couple of recommendations that they have. So pulling all that together, you can expect in an annual basis to spend $1,200 to $1,500, at least in our data, what you're showing on that. On the HVAC side of the equation, those numbers and those variables get wider just because everybody has different systems. It's going to be based on the various regions that you're in. If you have boilers, if you don't, if you look at the mechanical systems, are you throwing in your hot water heaters and getting those drained and serviced as well? There's just a myriad of different elements that you have to look at from that. But from a global scenario inside the equation on the mechanical piece, we see in our facilities that on a preventive maintenance on average, you're between 3,000 to 5,000. There's going to be some that skew that it's 20,000 because they may have what they call a VRF system, and you have cassettes in every bedroom, and you're having to go in and service each one of those individually. And then you have to do the condensate lines, and you have to put tabs in each one of the units to clean the water, and all the different things that go into it. That's a lot more extensive if you have simply a couple of boilers and a large package system that's servicing the whole building. That's going to be more in your $2,000 to $3,000, $4,000 or $5,000 depending on size range. So there's a lot of variability in that depending on the type of systems that you have in your facilities. But that gives you a little bit of an idea of cost, a little bit of idea of the difference of where people are spending versus men and women in their scenarios. Scott, let's go to the next slide.
And we're excited we got Eric in with us now.
Yes.
So. Hey guys, sorry about the delay there.
No, we gave them the warning, but I was starting to try to think through all your slides and if I could do them as well as you.
I just like to watch you sweat every now and then, Woody. So.
That's right. I appreciate it. Some of the things, and again, today is more, in all seriousness, is more about the opportunity to have an industry expert like Eric join us from a design standpoint and how architects work in terms of selection of materials, design, different elements as it relates to preventive maintenance and how we operate these facilities on an ongoing basis. And certainly, as we either try to maintain what we have, or we may do small renovations, or if you are in a scenario where you're contemplating a brand new renovation, Eric's going to provide some really good insights to think about from the relationship of design to preventive maintenance. But this slide just is something that you guys have heard us talk about quite a bit. Why is preventive maintenance important? Certainly it's going to extend the life of the equipment. Hopefully it will be less costly to maintain it, certainly from the ability to replace it. So the longer we can maintain it and keep it, the longer opportunity we have to build reserves. And when we do need to replace it, hopefully we've had enough time in extending the life to where we have the capital to be able to replace it without too much of a disruption to our budget or our capital reserves. One of the points that we always like to make as it relates to preventive maintenance, and especially this time of where we're seeing the economy and where we are and how the inflation is impacting our budgets, is you really need to trust but verify on both two sides of the equation when it comes to preventive maintenance. One, we love trusted vendor partners, folks that know the house well, they've been around a long time. But if it's somebody that's been there for many, many years and you haven't necessarily priced them to see, it's always good to maybe invite one or two other folks in from time to time to look and provide a proposal for maintaining that system if you have been with someone for a really, really long time. The other side of the piece of this is a lot of times as house directors or even house corporations, if you don't have a house director and you're out meeting your preventive maintenance partner and you're letting them in, you let them in and you say thank you and they walk out and they give you the bill and you really don't think anything more about it. It's really important though to see, did they actually take out dirty filters and take them out of the house and put them in the trash can and come in with brand new filters? Or did they just kind of sit out in the truck and not do anything, which has happened and before and things of that nature? So you really need to, did they go in and turn on all the faucets if it's a plumbing preventive maintenance thing, and did they kick all the toilets and flush them and all the different things that they should be doing? Is just trust and verifying where they are. And I think the other budgetary side of this equation, especially for our men's side, is that a lot of times we've been able to rely on our members on the preventive maintenance front, even with changing filters and doing some of the smaller items that we feel like we are capable of. And in the past, I would say that's true. But again, as we're moving in to this generation and our new members coming in, and we have a lot more complex systems, that doing it on our own is becoming more and more of a challenge. And then the other side of the challenge is as we try to outsource this stuff and we bring in professionals, it costs money. And so now we're in the dynamic of we've got to bring in more revenue because we have more expenses. how do we balance that and do that effectively? But at the
Plus,
end
the
of the day,
systems now are usually, so a lot of the systems now are more expensive than they used to be. Thermal
sure,
pane glass, air conditioning that you didn't used to have. So yeah, ton of that kind of stuff.
absolutely. So I think when you look at preventive maintenance right now from a fiscal scenario, you need to be looking at how can we negotiate anything better in our agreements to hopefully minimize that impact? Do we have the right team in place, and are they doing a good job for us? And then just continuing to look at the overall operational impact that preventive maintenance is doing, hopefully on a benefit side of the equation, but then also if it's creating more havoc budgetarily wise, or if you see costs starting to creep in certain areas, like that we've replaced this toilet 3 times now, or we've repaired it 3 times and we need to look at replacing it, or is this mechanical system really at the end of its useful life, and when do we get into timing to getting it replaced, either from a financial standpoint, or God forbid the boiler goes out in January and you have no heat in your building. All those things are active conversations that you need to be having as a board, active conversations as house directors that you need to be talking with your board and also your preventive maintenance providers with on a regular basis.
It's a good segue to tracking priorities. Woody, talk to us about that.
Yeah, so we on average, most of our, again, as Eric, I was telling, we were putting this together and looking at data for our presentation that we did last month for the industry, but looking at the data, we know we're depending on the facility, any given situation, we're tracking 18 to 22 different items on the life safety and preventive maintenance front for our facilities. What was interesting is we got into that's just 18 to 20 areas or devices or whatever it may be. But what bores out of that is over 200 to 300 work tickets in of themselves related to those pieces. Sometimes it can get 400 or 500 depending on the complexity, because there's different levels, different elements. So that can be overwhelming, which it is. But at the end of the day, if you're looking at, well, if we're just starting, or if we don't even have a preventive maintenance game at the moment, where should we focus our energy? Here's going to be the 8 that we really certainly look at, because we got to have HVAC. By code, by laws, all the different scenarios, we got to be able to heat and air and make sure and cool, and that our tenants are members and the residents and everybody are comfortable, and we've got that squared away. So that's certainly important. Kitchen equipment, especially, I know we have some of our kitchen management partners on the call today. They will tell you certainly that it's critical to them. We all know how important food is to our operations for those that have the ability to do it. Dryer vents are becoming more and more of an area of focus, both from local municipalities and certainly from the fire marshal side of the equation, because of the probability of them creating fire if we're not keeping those vents clean and the flammability of lint. Plumbing, we've talked about. I think that goes without saying. We want to make sure our plumbing is working. Electrical is becoming more and more of a focus as well, just because, again, all the devices that are coming to our houses, and we have old electrical infrastructure that's not necessarily able to maintain it. And then you throw in the new codes as it relates to arc fault and different elements that go into it. That whole understanding of your electrical systems and the preventive maintenance side on that is important. Flat roofs and gutters, especially in the roofs and things that we forget about. I can't tell you the number of times we walk on site and we see things growing in gutters, or if we've gone on flat roofs and we see small trees and other things because we don't pay attention to them. So those are a critical item, certainly from wear and tear and potential damage to the facility. Life safety goes without question. Most of us have our game. As an industry, we do a much, much better job on that, but that's a key component. If you don't maintain your fire alarms and some of those systems, and those are really critical, especially if it's been a while since you've looked at that and that equipment is coming outdated. It's kind of like your Wi-Fi, which is the last point there. Those systems, with the advancement of technologies, continue to date themselves quickly. So you need to really be looking at those systems more closely, both on the Wi-Fi and the life safety, specifically towards your fire alarm and fire alarm devices. If that fire alarm or fire alarm devices goes offline, what do we have to do? We get into Firewatch, which can get very expensive, and it's a pain in the butt in different scenarios. So those are our top 8 that we really spend and focus a lot of time on. So
Eric, we're going to start leaning on you at this point, I think, right? So
yeah.
talk to us a little bit about what you've been seeing.
I don't have as many words as Woody does, I don't think, but yeah, I come from the background when the house was a relatively simple thing. I was the house manager, and so you knew when the people in room 301 were getting cold that it was time to bleed the system. We had an account at the local hardware store, and if somebody broke a window, they knew what size our panes were and just go pick one up and put it in place. But those days are definitely behind us. Even trying to get my kids to fix anything around the house now, if they can't do it from their telephone, then it's somebody else's problem. And so we're definitely designing around a generation now that's not interested in even understanding how a lot of those systems work, or let alone taking of them if they understand how they work. So I think those are all great points. And when we go through the design process, there's 2 things when you go through Greek housing design. One is making sure the house works the way it's supposed to work. So there's the functional aspect of it. And then when you get into the details, making sure the details are the ones that are going to be easy to take care of. And a lot of times it's kind of getting into how do you simplify it? What's the simplest HVAC system we can use and have that be effective? What are the simplest ways that we can, what's floor finishes to take care of? How can we hose things down, that kind of thing. So, the ultimate is we want people to have pride in the spaces that they're in. And you can kind of see both what you see these images of are a fraternity on the right and a sorority on the left. The expectations are different within those different groups as to what the atmosphere is going to feel like. But there are aspects within each of those that I can tell you were deliberate selections because of the kind of space that they are. The Oriental rug, for instance, that you see in that image on the right is designed that you can spill all sorts of beer into that rug. You can throw it away. It was a cheap rug. Get a new one next year if you need to. It's not anything you're going to feel guilty about, but it does give that clubby atmosphere that they want to have in that kind of a space. Whereas the women, they like it light and bright and pillows and soft stuff and good things. So that's what you see on the left.
Let's go to the next one.
Yeah. So when we talk about the points of emphasis are really different within those groups. The biggest difference between the men's and women's are the social activities that take place within the house. The women's house is the emphasis is a lot on recruitment and a lot on sort of nurturing and warm and fuzzy for the women when they're in the house. Whereas in the men's house, it's more about, we're going to have parties. We want it to be a big social space. We're going to have a lot of people that aren't necessarily members of our organization in the house sometimes. How do we plan for those kinds of things? So FF&E, the furniture and equipment that we specify, you want to be things that are heavy duty, that are going to be long lasting, that aren't necessarily lending themselves to be stolen, that can spend the night out in the parking lot if they need to and not turn into mush. So we tend to, and we'll see in some images later on, go with some kind of heavier duty furniture, stuff that's sometimes harder to move, that doesn't necessarily, you can't lift and throw it very easily. Lighting, both women's and men's houses, you just can't really plan on lamps in a fraternity house. Those aren't going to last very long. So you've got to make sure you've got your lighting built in and in a way that it's not going to be something somebody grabs and walks off with. Wall sconces that are tight to the wall that don't include glass or plastic lenses that are easy to damage are things that we'll take a look at. So impact resistance, guys like to hit stuff. So, that's one of the things you just kind of think about it with everything that you put up, as to how it can resist some of those kinds of things. Scrubbability and cleaning, not really a whole lot different from one, but the women tend more to hire professional cleaning service to take care of their properties than the men do. A lot of times the men are still relying on themselves to do house jobs, and they usually do a pretty crappy job of it. So you want to make sure that what you're nitpicking is things that don't show or don't necessarily look so bad if they're not perfectly well cleaned, but something that you can clean pretty easily with mop and a bucket if you have to. We talked about the mobility without destruction a little bit earlier. Clean lines tend to lean towards that stuff where you're not specifying things with lots of buttons and pillows and things like that on it. In a fraternity house, you tend to be doing things again that you can scrub off pretty quickly. They do. Leather sofas will hold up pretty well in a lot of instances. Stained wood versus painted. Stained wood, when you bump into it, doesn't show the impact like painted wood does. Painted wood tends to chip, and so we'll tend in a lot of men's houses to go with a darker stain color, just for that very reason, that it doesn't show damage very easily. It tends not, and once you've started damage, then that sometimes attracts more damage. So we try to avoid some things like that. Windows, in terms of the simplicity of operation, in terms of, you can't, used to be you could still get by with single pane glass and storm windows. And to a degree, that's an easier way to go if you can get by with that. But most energy code now doesn't let us do that anymore. We had an incident with one fraternity house where they had really nice thermal insulated windows throughout their house. But in the room where they had their parties, all the windows had clouded over. And what happened was the thumping bass when they were having a party broke the seals of all the insulated glazing in that room. And so over time, those windows just all kind of clouded over, and it was a pretty expensive replacement of some pretty nice windows. So we're trying to design with understanding of some of those issues in mind too when we do that. And life safety equipment tampering, I'll talk specifically about exit signs, because those seem to be an ongoing target within fraternity houses of exit signs that are hanging down in the middle of a hallway. Seem to be irresistible to jump up, knock over as a basketball practice target or something. And so we usually are trying to design so that those can be built onto the wall or into the wall, so that they don't become the kind of a target that people want to hit. The same is true with sprinkler systems. We try to use concealed head sprinkler systems as opposed to anything that's got an exposed head. We try to keep pipes concealed and in walls, so that those don't become chin-up bars or clothes hanging and things like that and cause problems. So there's a lot of that we go through, especially in the men's side.
Well, I think what was interesting when you put this together originally, I mean, some of this stuff seems really obvious. But it's also, I think, even for someone like myself that lives this 24/7 and in the industry for a while now, it's a good reminder. It's like, that's why we do stain and some of the darker finishes in the men's facility versus the women, because of wear and tear. And think about when you talk about mobility, men's side of the equation, we don't typically provide bedroom furniture. We say, hey guys, you can do what you want. And I do not recommend that. Let me be clear about that, but that's a reality of where we are right now. So these guys are moving in and out a lot more frequently than the young women that are coming that maybe just have baskets and different stuff. So the walls take the beating and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. So I think having that intentionality, or remembering that intentionality, you talk about clean lines, and when we'd also talked a little bit here, it's just like trying to get it right. I mean, tile is beautiful. But how can we get and minimize grout lines, even in our kitchens in some scenarios? Because we just know in our bathrooms and kitchens and hallways and where we have tile and a lot of grout lines, even if you have epoxy grout, even if you seal it, and so over time, it's just really hard to maintain and keep clean in different scenarios. So whether you're renovating or going brand new, it's just really, it's really good stuff let me try to do a little bit better English here. It's really well invested time to talk through these pieces on design as it relates to preventative. Yes. And the last piece I'll say before we go to the next slide is just on the windows, even the panes in different scenarios. But we're big fans of single hung windows versus double hung. And I know the reality of it is, the double hung window is designed to you bring that top sash down and clean it and easier and things of that nature. Most of us to this day, our routine cleaners are not getting into these bedrooms to be able to clean the windows to the level that you want them to on a regular basis. And our members certainly aren't. So the reality of it is, in the summer, we're bringing professional window cleaners in. We're knocking it out at one time and we're calling it a day. So that double hung, for the reason it's really there, we don't need it. And not only that, most of our residents, for whatever reason, don't understand that you have two sashes and aligning them up to lock them in all those scenarios, it becomes a nightmare. And so do the single hung and call it a day. So just some different levels. But let's get a little bit into the pictures and the visuals that you provided on as it relates to the men's side.
Yeah. By the way, I just have to say that's the the level of honesty in that particular slide right there was pretty incredible. In terms of just all of the things that we've got, the reality of what we have to consider. So, gosh, that's so well done. So thank you for that. Let's move into those images Woody just talked about. Eric?
Yeah, so I've got a couple projects that we've done recently that are both actually just got completed, and they're both at Butler University. So for the men's house, this is a new build that was done for Lambda Chi Alpha on the Butler campus. They were in a situation where the university wanted their old property and offered to swap them a different piece of property. And so for us, the challenge from Lambda Chi was, we want it to feel like our old house. We want it to feel like we've been there for, hundreds of years, and that we're a part of the main Greek scene here on campus. And so this was designed, again, brand new, to feel like an English Tudor house from the 1920s. And what you can see on the front is the front approach. Of course, now when you do a new house, not only do you have the additional complication of the kinds of mechanical and electrical systems that we're required to have now, but also got handicap code and accessibility issues that now become a part of the play as well. So, what was a cool old door in a 1920s house now can't be quite that, because it's got to be handicapped accessible. We've got to, ramp access through it and those kinds of things. So we've been sensitive about how we've incorporated a lot of those. And then you can see around back, a big part of the house focuses on an outdoor entertainment space that's behind the house. They don't want that to be visible from the main street. They don't want anybody to know whether or not anything's happening there. And so we've got an enclosed social space that then backs up to their parking lot in the backyard.
Good, next, yeah.
So this does start to show then a lot of those aspects that we think about when we're going through the design process. So this is the dining room of that house. The front doors that you see go out onto that front terrace and look onto the main university campus. So they've got a pretty good site that they negotiated when they traded. But when we talk about lighting, for instance, in a men's house, we tend to not have much hanging from the ceiling. And in the case like this, where we did want to have something hanging from the ceiling, you design it so that they can do chin up in the chandeliers if they decide that that's what they need to do. So we've got 4 chains structurally anchored to the house, and then an LED cylinder that has an open bottom so that we don't see bugs. Because a lot of times, even in a lot of those houses, a lot of the light fixtures that get specified are a bowl type fixture, and they collect bugs and nobody bothers to clean the bugs out. They just kind of look ratty over time. So these were some custom fixtures that we worked on for them. The chairs are designed so that if you stack the chairs one on top of the other side down, the chair backs don't drag on the floor, so they don't get damaged. So we don't have damaged seating. We do still try to differentiate, what's the history of this particular chapter and what makes it interesting. So the idea that you can put on the wall some historical imagery. In a lot of cases, this is not an expensive endeavor to do, and that's not the originals. You have an archivist or somebody that's feels strongly about the property, can generate imagery that we can print out just on a laser printer. You can get them framed with some frames from IKEA and put them up on the wall. But they do a great job of telling the history and story of the chapter, or the notable alumni of the chapter, those kinds of things. You can see the dark finish. The flooring that's in this space is all ceramic tile flooring, both the combination of a slate look ceramic tile and a hardwood look ceramic tile, but everything's lush. You can, drag the tables around as much as you want. You're not going to tear up any wood floors. You can mop everything. You can hose it all down if you wanted to. We touched on this a little bit earlier, so I don't need to, but again, the example of the exit sign, where it just becomes an ongoing target. And, in this instance, there was a wall right there that an exit sign could have been mounted to, as opposed to it being mounted to the ceiling. So a thoughtful, just planning aspect of going through it to do that. And if you can recess the exit signs, even better. Now, they're all LED now. So once you do something like that, you shouldn't have to touch it for the rest of the life of the sign. But you can also, one of the things we really like to get involved in is if you do have to run new wiring, if you do have to run new infrastructure system in the house, talk to an architect, not just the engineers, about how that's going to happen, because otherwise you end up with hallways that are just full of wires that become easy to, grab and pull at. They're just, your corridors look like you're in a basement the whole time. It's just not a very attractive thing to do. And usually we can do some things like come up with a perimeter or one side cove detail where you can conceal your sprinkler pipes, get your sprinkler heads to be placed in a way that they're not going to cause damage or invite somebody to do anything to them, and still keep a pretty tidy look. And yes, it's more expensive than just getting the system in place. But in the end, having to go through and fix sprinkler damage, or having to go in and rewire for your Wi-Fi system or something because somebody grabbed the wire at a party and pulled it out of the wall, it's money well spent. Kitchen equipment is also one of those things, and this is by the way, that previous photo wasn't in the Lambda Chi house. The servery areas in a fraternity, tend to be pretty much heavy duty equipment. A lot of times we'll just do a residential type refrigerator in the night kitchen, which is what this is showing. And you just plan for the fact that the microwave oven's only going to last you maybe 2 or 3 seasons, and you're going to have to get a new one. So we don't do a lot of like niches and a whole lot of trying to be really tailored about building stuff in, because as soon as you do that, that equipment gets broken, and the new piece doesn't fit anymore. So we try to be pretty flexible with just an open counter, give them the power that they're going to need to plug in whatever it is that they're anticipating having in there, and move in that way. But you'll also see these are heavy duty cabinet doors that you open and sit on if you need to, and those doors will still close. It's not just melamine where somebody leans on the hinge and the door splits in half. So in areas where there's going to be a lot of heavy use like this, it's again worth spending the money to do it right the first time and not having to worry about it a whole lot after that. In the men's houses, there's a lot of gaming and social activities, and we try to have places that are just hangout spaces. Again, we're trying to get guys out of the room and do a couple things. First of all, discourage them from having to have a lot of furniture in their rooms, because there's a place to hang out and do it outside. But that's part of Greek life, is you're trying to build friendships and relationships and trying to get onto some neutral territory. So this is a typical floor lounge, in this case the 3rd floor. But TV is not recessed in the wall. It's there to they can change whatever Xbox is the latest and greatest connected to it, that kind of thing. The table is a heavy duty table. It actually has some pull out ottomans. I don't know where they are. so you can gather more people around if you need to. But this is a seat that you can sit on the back and put your feet on it if you want to. It's not a problem. The chair on the right is one that we've actually used from IKEA from time to time. It's a $70 plastic chair that's pretty comfortable, and you can use it as a lounge chair inside the house. You can use it as lounge chairs out in the social area outside. They stack. You can get them out of the way if you need to, and you can throw them around as much as you want. There's not really anything to break on them. So sometimes the right answer is not something that's an expensive answer. It's something that's a relatively inexpensive piece. Basements, you're going to have to get infrastructure stuff sometimes to do renovation, especially underneath the kitchen and stuff. So in a lot of cases, we usually try to avoid putting in a hard ceiling if we can. So in this case, what we did was recess the lighting in between the structural trusses of the building. So they're not hanging down, so you can't really get a good bat or swing at them or anything like that. But you can get pretty good lighting. There's two styles of lighting that are here. There's a continuous, so that when they're using this space as their chapter room, they get bright light in there, and it's a bright space. If they're having an event, then the recessed kind of directional moody lighting can be used instead, and that kind of gives you the ambiance for the party or something social event that you want to have down there. Again, to the right, it kind of shows some of the stained woodwork for the point of dark stained wood. So shifting to the women's side, the emphasis is on FF&E. Again, a prettier appearance generally for the FF&E stuff. They will tolerate lamps. We try, for instance, in the sofas, because the loose look of pillows is something that they tend to like, but we'll tend to specify seating that has attached cushions, so they don't walk off and disappear, and they don't look sloppy, because the women want it to look tailored and well kept all the time. So we'll tend to do attached cushion backs when we do things like that. We tend not to do buttons. Buttons do still pull off, so there's some care in how you pick some of those things. Lighting, light and bright, is always kind of a key issue, but in a women's house, you can hang a lot more pendant and decorative fixtures from the ceiling, and they'll tolerate that without them requiring a lot of maintenance. So that tends to be a little bit softer. There tend to be more chandeliers, more pendants over study spaces in the women's lighting side. Plumbing. There is certainly an emphasis more now on the bathroom being the country club style bathrooms. So we're looking at issues with drains and how easy it is to clean out drains, the flow, how the dry off area, the sense of privacy that you can have within those areas, but shower heads that are easy to clean and not just pretty, but they certainly like pretty as well. I can tell you from a learned lesson in the past, don't order plumbing fixtures online. Get the good stuff. Don't just get the pretty stuff. It doesn't last long. The electrical, boy, you can never have enough hair dryer and curler and things like that from that standpoint. And making sure that with an event going on, that there's going to be multiple people that are trying to do all that at the same time. So you just plan for it. Durability concerns to a degree are still similar to the fraternities, but they're not as hard on it. They're not dancing on their own furniture. They tend to be a little bit more careful with it. So we can sometimes have a little more latitude in the kinds of finishes that we'll specify for a durability standpoint, but they still have to move in and out of their rooms. So high impact drywall in the corridors is still a good idea. They're still moving some things around, just not to the same degree. Fixed versus flexible furniture, and I think what we were going for with that was the idea of building in furniture in the rooms. If you can do that, is a great idea. we've actually been working with one of the furniture manufacturers to develop a system of furniture that can be purchased but then built in, so that it is a built-in system ultimately, without necessarily having to use a local casework shop to do that. And there's a lot of benefit to just planning the room for the bed being in a certain location and the desk being in a certain location. And here's where we're going to do dressing, and we're not going to move a lot of stuff around. And so, so the idea of fixed furniture, if you can get by with it, is certainly, I think, a good way to go. And ultimately, hanging signage and banners. That's something that, because recruitment is a big design emphasis for the women's side, that there is a need to be able to hoist banners on the outside of the house in a way that's safe, and in a way that it looks good when they're in place and they don't blow around. The banners don't blow around and cause damage to other aspects of the house. So we can design some essentially nautical halyard systems to go in place to allow some of that stuff to take place, and allow for some easy changing of that. And at the same time, inside, when they go through the process of initiation, it's a pretty common practice for them to tape up sheets and things to kind of change the character of the dining room or the chapter room or something, to make it, you know, feel like a more mysterious and sacred space. And so we will design in a rail system that allows them to put hooks and plan for that stuff ahead of time, so that you don't have duct tape pulling the paint off of the bulkheads when they decide to take that stuff down, or they use Scotch tape and don't bother to really take it down, and those kinds of things in the long run.
Very good. Eric, in the 10 or 11 minutes we have left, talk to us about some of the proactively preventative, it almost feels like this redundant, but pieces that you built into your design at the Tri-Delta.
Yeah, so this is Tri-Delta sorority 2 doors down from the Lambic High House that we just talked about on the men's side. This was an existing 1920s structure. We did a gut renovation of the original structure and a new addition to the back that added a new kitchen and dining room and added substantially to the bed capacity of the house. We also enclosed an outdoor porch to extend their living and study spaces inside, and created a secure courtyard kind of in the house, where they have some outdoor study space. So where the men wanted it to be private and not so much seen, the women like to be seen and to see, but they also want to feel protected in the space that they're in. So that's what you see on the lower image there. So this is the interior of the dining space of that house. And so this does show a couple of the things that we just talked about. Furniture is a little bit lighter and more delicate. The lighting is certainly more delicate and more attractive from a lighting aesthetic standpoint. Window treatments, you can get by with draperies much more easily in sorority house than you can in fraternity houses. The similar emphasis on light and the views out, similar emphasis on ceramic flooring, in this case a wood appearance ceramic flooring, so that it's easy to maintain. In their case, a much more dressed up servery area for the women's servery and night kitchen. So again, there's a couple of areas where we've built in casework with the anticipation that some of the equipment may or may not change out over time, but the ice machine and the milk machine and drink dispensers and things like that. But there's a higher grade of casework from an aesthetic standpoint, not necessarily from a cost standpoint. The idea that it's lighter and brighter, the emphasis on the drop-ins and being able to get in and service the equipment pretty easily as part of the casework design. Go ahead. You know, in the bum room, a soft feel to this, and this was actually Kemp Interiors that worked with us on the selection of a lot of finishes and furnishings for this project. So I want to make sure to give them credit on this project. You know, even in this case, the basement has a more polished feel to it than typically you'll get in the fraternity houses. We can do drywall. The lamps, that's fine. It's okay to move to that next one. The idea of the lamps and the artwork, and we can have some decorative accessories on the table and feel like they'll still be there in a few days. Within the women's bathrooms there is more opportunity. And again, we'll try as much as we can to use ceramic tile on all the walls in a bathroom in all kinds of Greek houses all the way around. Sometimes you can't afford to do that. But in this case, you want to make sure that you get it at least above and beyond the splash zones of the sinks and above and around all the toilets on the in the areas behind. In this case, holding the tile down and putting a vinyl wall covering on the wall works perfectly fine. It's still a scrubbable wall covering. It gives kind of a nice aspect of it. Usually these kinds of wall coverings, you can integrate whatever the particular flower of that sorority is into that. Lighting is critical more so in sorority bathrooms than it is in men's bathrooms. They're going to be putting on makeup. They're going to want to see their faces more clearly than the guys don't really care. And so using lighting in combination with the mirrors is something that we'll always think about to make sure that that happens. You know, one thing that you can see here that's always a point of discussion in any of these houses is how are you going to do soap? How are you going to do paper towels? How are you going to do trash in the bathrooms? And so a lot of what we've landed on is rather than trying to build stuff like that in, is they'll go to Bed Bath and Beyond and just get a countertop soap dispenser or something like that. I don't think those work in a fraternity house because those become projectiles. So you do still have to kind of glue stuff to the walls in a fraternity. And it's usually whatever the vendor provides. And then when we talk again about basements, we think about moisture and the issue of how we're going to provide dry, non-humid spaces. And if moisture comes in, how are we going to control that? So the specification of finishes of waterproofing in anticipation of the fact that a flooding issue could occur, we try to build that into the design.
If I can jump in just for a second before we kind of dive in a little bit on just the general elements. Eric, thanks for your insights, obviously, and your expertise, and I mean, beautiful facilities. A couple of things that I wanted to add on the women's side of the equation, on the electrical piece, especially in design, but also, I mean, just in a renovation or new housing, something for everybody to keep in mind is that that's a very expensive proposition on the front end. The number, adding more outlets, the type of light fixtures, and all of those different pieces. So we commonly see, taking the preventative maintenance aspect out of it, that's a VE opportunity or requirement. Oftentimes on the women's side is the electrical components, just because of the things that you talk about. But I think it's very mindful when you're going through that process, whether it's VE, design, renovation, whatever it may be, is being mindful of outlets, the power load, things of that nature. Just because, to your point, it's a big emphasis. The other elements too, hanging of items. It used to be, to your point, a lot about hanging banners, but we're seeing more and more on the interior, especially in bedrooms, going ahead and giving the members an opportunity where we want them to hang stuff versus them coming in with command strips and nails and all the other stuff. Just give it, to your point, adding capacity to do that. And again, on the dining rooms or the chapter rooms where you may be doing ritual or you do hang stuff for recruitment or whatever, being intentional on the front end and putting those systems in place to welcome that is huge. The bedroom furniture, keep in mind too, fixed versus movable. A lot of times what we're looking at on the fixed bedroom furniture elements of it is to get educational space qualifications as an element of that. And we also see, again, the built-ins do tend to run a little bit more on the front end, but from a preventive maintenance and longevity, they certainly outlast most of what you can go and buy on the market that's not built in. On the bathroom piece, mop sinks on the women's side of the equation is a big benefit for your cleaning crews. And a lot of times we don't have the real estate, or we don't want them visible because they're sightly or whatever it may be. But thinking through your cleaning crew and their ability to come in and do a good job versus coming in with a mop bucket and just throwing water out, think through floor drains, things of that nature is very important on that. And then I just noticed in that one picture, especially on the men's side of the equation, you can get away with it more on the women's side. Undermount sinks, any type, again, on the men's side, any above counter sinks and those ridges and all those different elements, they collect dirt, they don't get clean, those types of things. So that goes back to your earlier comment on clean lines. So those are just some of the elements that I took out from on the women's piece. But I know, Scott, we're light on time. So this slide here, for everybody's benefit, is just kind of some of the global elements that may not be men specific or women specific or design. But Eric hit a little bit on the mechanical piece. That is a big scenario as we get into climate change and all the different elements that are out there that we're seeing regionally. We're also seeing a lot of our systems are aging and introducing new systems to the house. Think about complexity. Think about the ability to service them. What is the preventive maintenance going to take on these systems before you just go out and pick one or buy one or take whatever somebody recommends? You need engineers involved. You need, and to a lot of standpoints, to what Eric says, architects involved in thinking those through. I can't tell you the number of makeup air units, humidity issues, all of those different scenarios that we've dealt with in the last 2 or 3, 4 years that have led to 6-figure costs for mold remediation or just challenges to the facilities. Roofs, we've talked about already, to the standpoint, thinking through and making sure you have a preventive maintenance program for your roofs, for your gutters, downspouts, things of that nature, especially if you have a flat roof. Landscaping and irrigation, sometimes we forget if we have irrigation, you have a backflow preventer, those things need to be flushed, the systems need to be flushed, winterized every year. Don't let those pass you by. We've talked about windows. Cleaning in general, especially from a preventive maintenance standpoint, the better that we keep these things clean and take care of our house globally, if you will, whether it's clean filters in our HVAC systems, products. Are we using the right products on our floors and on our countertops and things of that nature? So sometimes when we're bringing in new systems or we're talking to our a new cleaning crew or whatever, we bypass, hey, what chemicals are you using? What materials are you using? Because that's very important on the longevity and the wear and tear of your materials that you have in your house.
And I would add snow melt to that as well, because a lot of times they'll just go get water softener salt to melt the ice, and that does a bunch of damage as opposed to using the right kinds of product to melt snow and ice.
Yes, fantastic add there. Life safety and technology. One of the big things that I would add here is just thinking through from a budgetary standpoint, using technology as an example. Wi-Fi, a lot of times you're having to update firmware 2 or 3 times, or every 2 or 3 years, I should say, and that can run $1,500 to a little bit more. And so sometimes we don't remember that, or we're not told that on the front end. So when you're upgrading Wi-Fi systems, ask about that and what type of software, quote unquote, software updates and the frequency that you'll need to do that and the cost. We've talked about flooring, walls, and FF&E. Eric did a fantastic job on that. And then external, think about drainage, siding, gutters. We talk about this, especially for our house directors that are on the call. Go out and walk your house when it rains. Take your umbrella, look and see where you have water ponding. Are our drains clear? What about our window sills and things of that nature? Just going around.
Gutters overflowing. Yeah.
Gutters overflowing. Right. If you don't see water coming out through the downspout, you got an issue. Just different things like that are just some good global practices that we would recommend. All right, Scott, we'll turn back to you.
We have a couple questions in the chat here I wanted to touch on. So one is asking, okay, what exactly do you mean by VE? So you want to expand on that?
Sure. So in the design process, or whether it's a renovation or new construction, value engineering. So we'll say Eric and his team come up with a beautiful design and we take it out for pricing and it comes back and it costs way too much. All right, we're going to have to, it used to be, you know, what are we going to cut out of the project or costing? So value engineering is a fancy term for we got to revamp our thought process here and find something that's cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the other questions is, I don't know if this is in our wheelhouse or not, but I think it almost speaks to the title of this presentation, which is Pride of Place. But it's talking about how can you motivate residents to keep common areas clean. This individual is talking about they've got housekeeping 3 days a week, and it's
well, I will tell you,
it's impossible to keep the common areas clean. So what would you add to that?
I mean, at the end of the day, where we always land both on that and on repairs and maintenance is you don't let things linger. So you have to, I understand you got to pick your battles, but you don't let that plate sit there for 3 days because you're hopeful that that undergraduate member or whoever is going to do what they need to do and take that in, or finding the responsibilities and things of that nature. I think for us, it's setting the expectation earlier. If there's something left, it disappears, and you reinforce it with the chapter and everyone else, and we're just not going to allow this to happen. And you, over time, if there are repeat offenders or if they're not getting it, then you've got to call them out and you've got to put an accountability measure in there. But for us, what we can do as house directors, volunteers, operations management firms like us or whatever, is if something's broke, if it's fit, if it's dirty or whatever, it's cleaned, it's repaired, and it's done so quickly, and we're setting the tone and the expectation. And if we get into a scenario where it's repeat offender scenarios, then that's a chapter situation that you need to be at those chapter meetings as alums and your boards and people and saying, look, this isn't how we do things.
Yep.
Right.
Eric, did you have something you want to add to that?
No, I mean, the days I think are gone when you could sort of go through that with pledge-up, and that was how you got a lot of that stuff taken care of. And, I don't want to see a dirty plate tomorrow morning by 9 o'clock. You got to have everything from the party cleaned up by then. And that was part of how you were developing the pledge classes. And I don't think we can do that anymore. So, but it is still, I've seen a lot of great examples, and actually that Lambda Chi house is a good one, where the culture that is developed and encouraged amongst the brothers themselves is to hold one another accountable for that kind of stuff, and to make sure that it doesn't drag around, and that they're calling each other out on it. It's like, come on, clean up your mess. This is not a Lambda Chi thing. So yeah, the best you can do, I think, is really try to get that seed well planted within the culture of the organization.
I love that. We've got a real theme around the letter P today. This has all been focused on preventative maintenance, but there is implied within that some proactivity that takes place. Like I love when Eric is talking about preventative maintenance, he's looking at it really from a design perspective. What can I do from a design perspective that will prevent major cost or major upgrades to happen in the future? What can I do to proactively set this home up for success? And then when what he's talking about from an operational perspective and the ongoing mechanical aspect of the home, that's all being proactive. Let's do something. Let's manage things now, so we're not having let's spend a little bit of money now to prevent us from spending a ton of money later. So all of those pieces that Eric and Woody have talked about from a preventative / proactive perspective all comes back to the pride of place. So these young men and women are coming from their families of origin. They're looking for a family of choice, and we want them to feel pride when they walk in their homes. We can start to incorporate that from in the design perspective. We can continue to incorporate that and inform and really fuel that by doing things proactively and preventatively, so the house continues to be a place where they want to live and they want to hang out And then the other piece that that Eric talked about was really planting that seed and talk about, okay, this is our purpose, this is our culture, and this is what we expect of you. So there's a not only from a design perspective and an ongoing management perspective, but from an expectations perspective, this is how you're going to live in this place. This is how we're going to treat it, and this is how we're going to have this experience together. So I love everything that we've talked about today because it's all based around being proactive, and I just am so grateful for this conversation. That being said, I know we've gone a little bit over, so I think I've hit all the questions in the question stream here. So if you have additional questions, we don't charge you anything for answering a question. So please continue to reach out. If you've got questions, whether it's now or, man, you're thinking about, oh gosh, I really wish I'd have asked this earlier. You can reach Woody at CSLmanagement.com. His phone number is also on the screen. You can reach Eric at Rowland at Luminaut.com, and his phone number is on the screen. If you have ideas for ongoing programs or you want a follow-up conversation, I would love to know those as the director of education and the host of this series. So if you've got ideas for programs, you got questions about the session today, please reach out to me at Scott at CSL Management, and that's my cell phone number on the screen. So you can either call or text me there. So with that being said, I want to say thank you again to everybody for joining today, for continuing to invest in these facilities and those who call them home. We just can't begin to tell you how grateful we are for your commitment to this community and the experience that we're trying to provide each of the young men and women who call these chapter houses home. So thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on House at Home. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Eric, for being on.
Thanks.
See you guys.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, guys.